The ring caught the light first, a small sapphire in worn gold, riding the third finger of a waitress's left hand as she set down a glass of iced tea. And across the rooftop terrace, a billionaire grandmother went still as carved stone. Vivian Ashford did not blink. She did not breathe. One moment she had been reaching for her napkin in the warm summer dusk, and the next she was frozen, her gaze locked on that ring as though the whole glittering city behind it had gone dark. Then her eyes filled, and before anyone at the table understood what was happening, the old woman was on her feet with both arms open, and she pulled the startled young waitress into her and wept. But that came at the end of the evening. It is better to start where Nora Bell started, an hour earlier, knotting her apron at the back of the house, with no idea that the night was about to take her whole life and turn it over like a stone. The Larkspur sat 11 floors above the harbour, and in July the heat rose with the elevator. By 6 o'clock the terrace doors were propped open to let the evening breathe, and the air that came in smelled of salt water and warm pavement, and the faint green of the potted lemon trees lined along the rail. Nora liked this hour best, the gold light slanting low across the white tablecloths, the clink of the first glasses, the city softening below into amber and haze. "You're humming again," said Marisol, sweeping past with a tray of folded linens. "You only hum when rent's due. Rent was due Tuesday." Nora tucked her order pad into her apron. "I'm humming because I survived it." The anthem of the working woman." Marisol set the linens down and squinted at her. 20 years on these floors had given Marisol a face that registered everything and forgave most of it. Big party at 7. Private booking, terrace corner, the good table. Reggie wants his strongest girl on it, and somehow that's you. So fix your collar. Nora fixed her collar. Her fingers brushed the thin chain at her throat out of habit, then dropped to the ring on her hand, turning it once with her thumb, a small motion, worn smooth by 1,000 repetitions. The ring was the only thing she owned that had no price. Everything else in her life could be replaced. The studio apartment with the radiator that knocked. The bicycle. The 2 good aprons. People too, she had learned early. They came, and then they were gone, and you did not get to keep them. But the ring stayed. "Who's the party?" she asked. Marisol's mouth twitched. "Above your pay grade and mine. Reggie's been polishing the silver like the Queen's coming. All I know is the name on the book is Ashford, and when Reggie said it, he made a face like a man swallowing his own tongue. Ashford." Nora rolled the word around. It meant nothing to her. She had not grown up in a world where names came with weather. Should it mean something? "Child," Marisol looked at her with something between pity and affection. "Ashford Hotels. You've cleaned rooms in their buildings, probably. Old money. The kind so old it's forgotten it ever had to earn anything." She picked her tray back up. "Be nice, be invisible. And whatever you do, don't let the old lady fluster you. Word is she's eaten managers for less than a cold roll." The party arrived at 7 exactly, and Nora understood at once what Marisol had meant. There were 4 of them, and they moved through the terrace the way a tide moves, without hurry, certain the room would arrange itself around them. At the center walked an old woman in pale grey silk, her white hair swept up, a single strand of pearls at her throat. She was small. That was the first surprise. Nora had expected someone towering, and instead the woman barely reached the shoulder of the man beside her. But smallness in her was not weakness, it was concentration, the way a diamond is small. And the man beside her, Nora's eyes went to him and, against her own good sense, stayed a half-second too long. He was perhaps 33. Dark-suited despite the summer heat, with the kind of stillness that came from never having to raise his voice to be heard. He did not smile at the hostess. He did not look at the view. He moved with one hand lightly at the old woman's elbow, watchful, as though the floor itself might betray her, and his face gave away absolutely nothing. "That's the grandson," Marisol breathed at Nora's shoulder. "Or near enough. Julian Hale. Runs the whole company for her now. They say he hasn't laughed since the spring melt. They say a lot of things. They do. Table's yours. Go be invisible. Nora went. Up close, the old woman's eyes were the palest blue, sharp as a winter morning, and they swept over Nora once, apron, collar, hands, and dismissed her in the time it took to sit. This did not wound Nora. She was used to being scenery. There was a freedom in it. You could watch people who had decided you weren't worth watching. "Good evening," Nora said. "Welcome to the Larkspur. May I start anyone with water? Still or sparkling?" "Sparkling," said the old woman, not looking up. "Very cold. And the wine list to Mr. Fine. Hale. He'll know better than the rest of us." "Of course." Nora set down the menus. Her thumb turned the ring once, unconsciously, as she reached across the table. And she did not notice the man, Julian, glance at her hand, and then away. The smallest snag of attention, gone before it could mean anything. The evening unfolded the way these evenings did. Nora carried the sparkling water, cold enough to fog the glass, and the bottle sweated rings onto the linen that she blotted without being asked. She brought bread still warm from the kitchen, the crust crackling faintly as she set it down, and a dish of olive oil green as cut grass. The two younger guests, a sleek woman and a louder man, some kind of cousins or associates, Nora couldn't tell, talked about properties in 2 countries and a yacht that had disappointed them. The old woman, Vivian, said little. She ate almost nothing. Mostly she looked out at the harbour where the first lights were coming on, and her face, in the unguarded moments, was the loneliest thing Nora had seen in a long time. It takes one to know one, Nora thought, and went to fetch the second course. Careful with the corner table, Reggie hissed at her by the pass, his forehead shining. "Mrs. Ashford left a place that cost more than this building over a fish course once. Don't breathe wrong. I've got it, Reggie. Do you? Because your hands are shaking." They weren't. But Nora flexed them anyway, and carried the plates out under the deepening sky. It happened over the dessert. She had cleared the last of the savory plates, and brought out the thing the kitchen was famous for. A lemon tart with a blister of torched sugar, the smell of warm citrus and caramel rising off it in the summer air. She set the first plate before the old woman, leaning in, her left hand braced lightly on the white cloth for balance. And Vivian Ashford looked down at the tart, and then at the hand beside it, and stopped. Nora felt it before she understood it, the way the air at the table changed, the way a room changes when someone stops pretending. The old woman's fork hung in the air. Her pale eyes had fixed on Nora's ring, and they were no longer cold. They were enormous. "Where?" said Vivian Ashford, and her voice came out cracked, nothing like the iron of an hour before. "Did you get that ring?" Nora straightened slowly. Across the table, Julian Hale had gone still in a different way now, his attention sharpening to a point. "It was my mother's," Nora said carefully. The old rule rose in her. Be invisible. Be nice. Don't fluster. I've always had it. Is something wrong? I can move the... Don't. The word cracked like ice underfoot. Vivian's hand shot out, small, ringed, trembling, and closed around Nora's wrist. Her grip was startling, fierce, the grip of someone who had been holding on to the edge of something for a very long time. "Don't move. Let me see it." "Please." That please undid the whole table. The sleek woman set down her glass. The loud man fell quiet. Reggie, hovering at the terrace door, went the color of the tablecloth. Nora's heart had begun to pound. She did not know why. She only knew that the old woman's eyes were swimming now, and that her own thumb had crept to the ring and could not turn it, because the old woman would not let go of her hand. "It's just an old ring," Nora said softly. "Sapphire. And the gold's worn down. It isn't worth. Turn it." Vivian's voice dropped to almost nothing. "Turn it over. The inside. There should be," her breath caught. "There should be words on the inside." The whole terrace seemed to lean in. The harbour wind moved through the lemon trees. Somewhere below, a horn sounded, and was gone. Nora's mouth had gone dry. "How?" she whispered. "Do you know that?" Because there were words on the inside. She had known them since she was a child. Since the night a woman she could barely remember had pressed the ring into her 4-year-old hand and folded her small fingers over it and told her to keep it safe. To keep it always. That it would tell her who she was when she was ready to ask. Nora had read those words 10,000 times by flashlight in rooms that were never hers. 6 small words, engraved in a hand so fine you needed the light just right. She had never told a soul what they said. She had never had a soul to tell. "Take it off," Vivian breathed. "Please, I have to. I have to read it. I have to be sure." "Grandmother," Julian's voice cut in, low, even, a hand laid on her shoulder. "You're frightening her. And yourself. Let the girl go." "Julian." The old woman did not turn. Tears stood in her eyes and did not fall. "Be quiet. For once in your careful life, be quiet." Nora's fingers were shaking now, truly shaking, as she worked the ring up over her knuckle. It had not left her hand in years. Her skin felt naked where it had been. She held it out, and the old woman took it as though it were made of breath, and turned it to catch the last gold light off the harbor, and brought it close to those failing winter eyes. "And read." Nora watched the words land on the old woman's face the way a wave lands, slow, then all at once. Vivian Ashford's lips moved, shaping something silent. The color went out of her. The pearls at her throat trembled with her pulse. And then a sound came out of her that Nora would hear for the rest of her life, a small broken sound, half a sob and half a name, and the fork clattered off the table and rang against the stone. "It can't," the old woman whispered. "It can't be. After all this, after everything Ma'am?" Nora's own voice had gone thin. "Ma'am, please. Are you all right? Should I get?" But Vivian Ashford was already rising. She came up out of her chair with a strength no one would have guessed was left in her, knocking her napkin to the floor, ignoring Julian's hand, ignoring the whole staring terrace. She still had the ring closed in one fist, pressed to her chest. With the other arm she reached for Nora, reached up, because Nora was the taller of them now, and she pulled the bewildered waitress down into her, and held on, and wept. It was not a graceful weeping. It was the weeping of someone who had been keeping a door shut for years, and had just felt it blow open. Her whole small body shook with it. Her pearls pressed cold against Nora's collarbone. She smelled of dry roses and powder and, underneath, of something human and frightened, and her hands fisted in the back of Nora's apron, as though Nora might dissolve if she loosened her grip. "I'm sorry," Vivian sobbed into her shoulder. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, I didn't know. All this time I didn't know." Nora stood frozen in the old woman's arms, her hands hovering, not knowing where to land. Over Vivian's white head she met Julian Hale's eyes, and found him watching her with an expression that had cracked at last all the way open. Not cold now, not careful, but stunned and wary, and underneath it something that looked almost like fear. "I think," Nora managed, her own throat closing, "I think there's been some mistake. I'm just the waitress. I just brought the dessert. I don't know you. I'm sorry, but I don't know you. You don't." Vivian agreed, pulling back at last to hold Nora's face in both trembling hands, searching it feature by feature as if reading a second inscription. The tears ran freely down the powdered lines of her cheeks. "You don't know me. But I know that ring. I held it the day it was made. I put it into my son's hand myself." Her voice broke, and the words inside it I chose. "So you will tell me, child, and you will tell me the truth. What was your mother's name?" The terrace had gone utterly silent. Even the city seemed to hold its breath. Nora's lips parted. The name she almost never said aloud, The name that belonged to a woman who was now only a warmth in her memory and the weight of a ring. It rose in her throat and stuck there, because some animal part of her understood that to say it was to step off a ledge she could not climb back up. "I think you'd better sit down," Julian said quietly to his grandmother, but his eyes had not left Nora. "Both of you. And I think, before anyone says another word, someone should close those doors." But Vivian Ashford did not sit, and the doors did not close, and the old woman's hands stayed warm and desperate on Nora's face. "Her name," she whispered again. "Please, I have waited so long to be wrong about what I did. Tell me her name." And Nora, with the whole bright terrace blurring at the edges and her ringless hand pressed flat against her own pounding heart, heard herself begin to answer. The thing about being no one is that it is safe. Nora had spent 26 years learning the safety of it. You did not get attached. You did not let a name leave your mouth in a room full of strangers. You kept the one thing that mattered on a worn gold band, and you turned it with your thumb when the night got long, and you survived. And survival was enough, and you did not. You did not ever let a rich old woman hold your face in her hands and ask you to undo the only careful life you had built. "I can't do this," Nora said, and stepped back out of the old woman's grip so fast that her hip struck the edge of the table and set the glasses ringing. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but I have tables. I have other tables. I can't, please, can I have my ring back? Please, I need my ring." "Of course." Vivian opened her fist at once, and there it sat in her palm, small and worn and impossibly heavy. But her fingers, when Nora reached for it, closed gently around Nora's. "Of course you may have it. It was always yours." "But child," the old woman's voice steadied for the first time, and in it Nora heard the iron come back, the iron of a woman who had run an empire and lost something it could not buy. "If those words say what I believe they say, then you are not no one. You have never been no one, and I am not going to let you walk back into that kitchen and disappear from me a second time." "A second time," Nora repeated. The words made no sense. They made too much sense. "I've never met you. I've never met any of you. How could I disappear a second time?" Julian had come round the table now. Up close he was taller than she'd realized, and the careful stillness of him had a current running under it, fast and cold. "Mrs. Ashford," he said to Nora, formally, as if testing the shape of something. Then, watching her face, "No. Not Ashford. Forgive me. What's your name? Your full name?" "Nora," she said, because there seemed no harm in the first half. "Nora Bell." Bell, Vivian's breath left her in a rush. She pressed the back of one hand to her mouth. Bell. She would have used Bell. It was her mother's name, before she stopped herself. Her eyes found Julian's, and something passed between them that Nora could not read. Some inheritance of grief and old wrongdoing that had nothing to do with a waitress and a lemon tart, and yet had everything to do with her. "Catherine," Vivian whispered, turning back. "Was your mother's name Catherine?" And the terrace tilted, because it was. Because the name in Nora's throat, the name she had not said aloud since the last foster placement had told her to stop telling stories, the name on the inside of the ring along with 5 other words, that name was Catherine. And Nora had never once spoken it to a stranger, and this small weeping woman in grey silk had pulled it out of the summer air as though she had been carrying it herself for 20 years. Nora did not answer. She did not have to. Her face answered for her, and Vivian Ashford saw it land and made the small broken sound again and reached for the back of a chair to keep from folding. "Get her some water," Julian said sharply to the frozen Reggie, "and clear the terrace. Now then, lower, to Nora, with an urgency that had finally burned through the cold. Whatever you're about to do, please don't run. I can see it on you. You're going to run." His jaw tightened. "I don't blame you. An hour ago I'd have told you this woman never cried in her life. But if you walk out that kitchen door tonight, You'll spend the rest of yours wondering what she was about to say. I know. Because I've spent 12 years wondering things about this family. And I'm not even. He stopped. I'm not even blood. And you might be. The word landed in the warm air and would not leave it. Blood. Nora looked from the old woman's streaming face to the young man's burning one, to the ring sitting in her own open palm with its 6 secret words pressed against her skin, to the city going gold and then blue beyond the rail, to the lemon trees, to the white cloth, to the small, clean, ordinary life she had carried up in the elevator at 6 o'clock and would never, she understood now, carry back down again unchanged. What do the words say? Nora heard herself ask, very quietly, that you put inside my mother's ring. Vivian Ashford lifted her chin. The tears had carved clean lines through the powder on her face, and she did not bother to hide them. And when she spoke it was not to the terrace, or to Julian, or to the harbour, but only to the trembling young woman in the waitress's apron in front of her, as though they were the only 2 people who had ever stood on this earth. Come away from here, the old woman said, and I will tell you every word. And then I will tell you about my son. And then, her voice fractured and she let it. And then, if you will allow an old woman who got everything wrong the one thing she does not deserve, I would like, very much, to know my granddaughter. The tray slipped from Marisol's hands somewhere behind them and rang against the stone, and no one turned. And Nora Bell stood with her mother's ring in her open hand, and the whole impossible night blazing in front of her, and felt the floor of her careful life give way at last beneath her feet. She did not run. Later she would not be able to say why. Whether it was the old woman's hand still warm around her own, or the word blood hanging in the lemon-scented air, or only the plain animal exhaustion of a woman who had carried trays since noon and had nowhere left in her to flee to. But when Julian Hale put his hand at the small of her back, light as a question, and steered her off the terrace and through a service door into the quiet of a private dining room with the harbour framed in glass, Nora went. The room smelled of cold candle wax and lilies past their best. Someone had set it for a party that would never sit down to it now. 12 covers, the silver laid, the napkins folded into stiff white peaks. Vivian sank into the nearest chair as though her strings had been cut, and Julian crouched at her side, 2 fingers at her wrist, counting, I'm not made of glass. Julian, the old woman said. But she let him count. You went grey as the tablecloth, he said. Humour me. Nora stood by the door, with her ring closed in her fist, the metal warm now from her own grip, and watched the careful young man take care of the woman who had just turned the whole evening over. The tenderness in it surprised her. She had filed him under cold an hour ago, and now the file would not close. Sit down, child, Vivian said. Please, you're swaying on your feet and it's making me seasick. I should tell my manager, Nora said. I have tables, the 8 top by the, Reggie is clearing your tables. Vivian's voice had steadied into something nearer its old iron. Reggie would clear the harbour if I asked him. Sit, Nora sat. The chair was deep and meant for someone who never doubted they belonged in it, and she perched at its edge like a bird ready to be gone. The door opened before anyone could speak. The 2 younger guests came in, the sleek woman first, then the loud man at her heel, and Nora understood at once that whatever softness had filled the private room had just met its opposite. The woman was perhaps 40, in a column of charcoal silk, her dark hair scraped back so severely it looked like a decision. The man behind her was florid and handsome, going soft, a glass of red still in his hand, his collar open. Well, the woman said, and her voice was cool and lovely and entirely without warmth. That was a performance. The whole terrace is talking. Bianca Ashford, in case the waitress is collecting names for later. She let her gaze travel down Nora and back up, unhurried, pricing her. And this is my brother, Spencer. Aunt Vivian, you've had a shock. Let me call the car. Let's get you home before you say something the lawyers have to spend a year unsaying. I am not going home, Vivian did not turn to look at her niece. "Sit down or stand, Bianca, but do not manage me. Someone has to." Spencer dropped into a chair across from Nora and set his glass down with a click. His eyes were red-rimmed and friendly in the way of men who have decided to be friendly so they can be cruel later. "Look, no offense, sweetheart. What's your name?" "Nora. Nora. Lovely. No offense, Nora. But you have to see how this looks." He spread his hands. 11 floors up, a private booking. The family name in the book where anyone could read it. And suddenly the girl pouring the water has a ring that makes our grandmother weep into the dessert. "Come on, you're a smart girl. You see it." "I don't see anything," Nora said. "I was carrying a lemon tart." Spencer, Julian had not raised his voice, but the single word cut the man off clean. He straightened from his grandmother's side and turned, and the room rearranged itself around him the way the terrace had rearranged itself around Vivian an hour before. She didn't book the table. She didn't choose the restaurant. The Larkspur was Bianca's suggestion, in fact. So if you're building a story where this young woman engineered tonight, you'll want to explain how she made you pick the venue. A small silence. Bianca's jaw moved. "Don't be tiresome, Julian. I'm protecting this family. You of all people should understand what it costs to protect this family, given what we pay you to do it." "I understand exactly what it costs," Julian said. "I've paid it for 12 years. "Sit down." Bianca sat. She did it the way a blade goes back into a sheath, and Nora made a note of it. This woman would yield ground only to take it somewhere else. Now, Julian pulled out the chair beside Nora and lowered himself into it, close enough that she could smell cedar and clean linen under the city heat. He turned to face her fully, and his eyes, she saw now they were a dark, tired hazel, held hers with a steadiness that asked her not to bolt. "Nora Bell, I'm going to tell you what my grandmother is too frightened to tell you plainly, and you can decide what to do with it. May I?" Nora's thumb found the ring through her closed fingers and turned it. Once, the old motion, the only steady thing in the room. "All right." 30 years ago, Julian said, Vivian had a son. Her only child. His name was Daniel Ashford. He watched her face as he said it, and Nora kept it still. Because the name meant nothing to her, and she needed them to see that it meant nothing. Daniel was, by every account I've ever collected, and I've collected a great many, the warmest person this cold family ever produced. He drove his mother to distraction. He gave money away. He fell in love with the wrong people on purpose, I think, because it annoyed everyone. A muscle moved in his cheek. When he was 24, he fell in love with a woman the family did not approve of. A woman with no name worth weather, as my grandmother would have put it then. Her name was Catherine. The lilies breathed their faint sweet rot into the room. Out on the harbour a ferry sounded one long note, and the glass hummed with it. "Don't," Nora whispered. "Please don't say a thing you can't take back." "I put a stop to it," Vivian said. The old woman's voice came from the deep chair, quiet and terrible, and every head turned. She was sitting very straight now, the ring nowhere. Nora's ring was in Nora's own fist, and her hands were folded in her lap with the discipline of 70 years. "I want you to hear it from me," Vivian said, "and not from him, because he tells it kindly, and it does not deserve to be told kindly. I put a stop to it. Catherine was a waitress. A breath. Like you. She poured my water at a charity luncheon, and my son could not stop looking at her, and within the year he wanted to marry her. And I, who had buried a husband and built a company alone, and decided I knew the shape of the world better than my own child, I told Daniel that if he married that girl, he would not have $1 of Ashford money. Not one, not ever. And I told Catherine to her face that she was a clever opportunist, and I would break her in the courts if she did not let him go. "Aunt Vivian," Bianca said sharply, "whatever you think you remember, you don't have to confess it to the help." Be quiet, Bianca. Vivian did not so much as glance at her. Her pale eyes stayed on Nora, and they were dry now, dried by something harder than tears. I had that ring made for Daniel to give her. Before I turned, when I still thought I might bless it. Sapphire, because her eyes were blue, he said. Blue like yours. Child, I have been looking at your eyes for 10 minutes and trying to breathe, and inside it I had words engraved, because I was sentimental once, before I taught myself not to be. Her voice thinned. And then I took it all back. The blessing and the ring and the future. Daniel gave Catherine the ring anyway, the night he left this family for good. He chose her. He walked out of my house with nothing but that ring and the clothes he stood in, and I let him go because I was certain he would come crawling back when the cold reached his bones. He didn't, Julian said quietly. He didn't. Vivian's folded hands tightened. He never spoke to me again. 8 years later I had men find him, because I was old enough by then to be ashamed, and they came back and told me he had gone overseas. That he and Catherine had been in an accident on a coast road in the rain. That there was a child, but the trail of the child had gone cold through 3 countries, and 4 years of paperwork, and the iron cracked, just once, and she pressed her knuckles to her lips and mastered it. I stopped looking. I told myself the child was a rumor. I have lived 22 years inside that lie, because the truth was a thing I could not lift. The room had gone so quiet Nora could hear the candle wax tick as it cooled. The words, Nora said. Her voice did not sound like hers. Inside the ring. Tell me the words. Vivian closed her eyes, and from memory, in a voice worn smooth by 1,000 silent repetitions of her own, Nora realized with a lurch that they had both been carrying the same 6 words for 2 decades, one inside a ring and one inside a grief. The old woman recited them. For Catherine, he chose true. Nora's fist opened. She did not decide to open it. Her fingers simply gave, the way the terrace floor had given, and there sat the ring in her palm in the lily dim light, and she turned it without looking, because she did not need to look. She had read those words by the glow of a dozen borrowed nightlights. He chose true. She had thought, as a child, that V was a flourish, a decoration, the kind of curl a jeweler added to fill a space. She had spent her whole life carrying a stranger's initial against her skin. V, Nora whispered. Vivian, the old woman agreed. And that was the moment Spencer chose to lean forward and say, gently, ruinously, you understand we'll need a test. A medical one. Cheek swab, lab, the whole thing. I'm sure you understand. A ring's just a ring. Anyone can come by a ring. It should have been outrageous. In a way it was. But Nora, who had been told by a foster mother at 11 to stop telling stories about a rich family and a sapphire, and a mother named Catherine, because such stories made the other children resentful and made Nora hard to place, Nora felt something in her chest go cool and clear. Because here was the world she recognized, the world that asked for proof. The world that did not hug you into its silk before it had run your name through a machine. Yes, she said. You should test. You should absolutely test. She closed the ring back into her fist and stood, and her apron strings brushed the table. Because I don't want anything that's yours. I came up in the elevator at 6 with 2 aprons and a bicycle lock in my pocket, and I'll go back down with the same. And the ring, which is mine, and was my mother's, and which I'd like to keep wearing while your laboratory decides whether I'm allowed to exist. That, said a dry voice from the doorway, is the most words anyone's gotten out of her in 3 years. I've been trying since the soup. Marisol stood at the service door with a pitcher of ice water beading in her hand, having clearly been sent in, and clearly stayed to listen, and she set the pitcher down on the sideboard with the calm of a woman who had survived 20 years of rich people's weather, and intended to survive this. Reggie's having a small private collapse by the dish pit, she added. I told him the building's insured. Nora, your tables are covered. Sit back down, baby. You're the color of the napkins. Nora sat back down. She had not known until that moment how badly she needed one person in the room who had known her before tonight. Thank you, Marisol, Julian said, and there was something almost like gratitude in it. Marisol looked at him the way she looked at a new busboy who showed promise. You're the one who hasn't laughed since spring. I had a bet with the line cooks. She picked the pitcher back up. Drink the water, all of you. Grief is dehydrating. And she went, the door swinging shut behind her, and for 1/2 second the awful tension in the room had a crack of light in it, and then it closed again. A test is reasonable, Julian said. He'd been watching Nora through all of it, and now he spoke to her and not to Spencer. Not because anyone here doubts what's in front of them. I've spent 12 years reading my grandmother's face, and I have never once seen it do what it did tonight. But because there are people in this family who will use the absence of a test as a knife, and I would rather take that knife out of their hands now. His eyes flicked, just barely, toward Bianca. Wouldn't you agree, Bianca? Better to have the certainty? Oh, certainty, Bianca said. By all means. She smiled, and it was a beautiful smile, and it did not touch any other part of her face. Let's all be certain. Let's be certain how convenient it is that a girl with no people and no money and a hard luck story polished to a shine turns up holding a ring on the very night the trust restructures. You did read the trust documents this week, didn't you, Julian? You drafted half of them. She turned the smile on Nora and lowered her voice into something almost kind, which was worse. Forgive me, Nora. You seem like a perfectly nice young woman, but you've walked into the middle of a very old, very expensive story. And you should know before you let that dear old woman call you granddaughter in front of witnesses, there is a great deal of money in this room. And money makes everyone, even grandmothers, see faces in the clouds. Bianca. Vivian's voice was very low. I'm protecting you, Aunt Vivian. You are protecting your inheritance. The old woman opened her eyes, and they were winter again, the iron come fully home. I am not yet so far gone that I cannot tell the two apart. You forget that I invented your tricks. I used them on a waitress named Catherine across a luncheon table 30 years ago, and I have been on fire about it ever since. And I will not sit in this room and watch you do to her daughter what I did to her. It was the first time Nora had heard the old woman raise her voice, and it was not loud, and it silenced the room more completely than any shout. Test the ring, Vivian said. Test the girl. Swab her, photograph her, send your investigators, do all of it. I welcome it. Because when it comes back, and it will come back, I want it in writing. I want it notarized. I want it nailed to the door of this family, where no one can ever pry it loose, that Nora Bell is Daniel's child, and that I knew it the moment I saw the ring, and that the only person at this table who ran toward her with open arms was the old fool who once chased her mother away. She was breathing hard. Julian had a hand at her shoulder again. Now, Spencer, you wanted a laboratory. Arrange it. Tomorrow, the good one, not your cousin's friends. And you will pay for it out of your own allowance, since you're so concerned with the family's money. Spencer's florid face had gone slack. Aunt Viv, tomorrow. He shut his mouth. Nora sat very still in the deep chair with the ring biting into her palm, and watched these strangers fight over her existence as though she were a clause in a document, and felt the cold, clear thing in her chest harden into something that was almost safety, because at least cold was familiar. The hug on the terrace had terrified her. This she knew how to do. You stayed quiet. You let the powerful people decide your weather. You kept the one thing that was yours, and you waited for the part where they took it away. I'd like to go home, she said. Please, I'll do your test tomorrow. I'll swab whatever you want, but tonight I'd like to finish my shift and ride my bicycle home and sleep. If that's allowed. Of course it's allowed. Vivian reached across the small distance and laid her hand over Nora's closed fist, over the ring, over both. Her skin was paper and warmth. "You don't need my permission to go home, child. You never needed my permission for anything, and that is the great sorrow of my life. But will you let me ask one thing first?" Nora's throat closed. "Ask. Where do you sleep?" The old woman's voice had gone soft and ruined again. "Tonight, when you ride your bicycle home in the dark. Where is it that you go?" And Nora, who never told anyone anything, who had survived 26 years on the strict economy of saying nothing true to anyone with the power to use it, Nora heard herself say, "A studio on Renwick Street. Above the laundromat. The radiator knocks." And then, because the old woman's eyes had filled again, and Nora could not bear the way they brimmed and would not spill, "It's warm in summer, from the dryers underneath. It's the warmest place I've ever lived, actually. I always thought that was funny." Vivian made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost the other thing, and pressed Nora's fist to her own papery cheek and held it there. "Above a laundromat," she whispered. "My granddaughter has been sleeping above a laundromat warmed by other people's washing. 11 stops from a house with 40 empty rooms, and I have been having my coffee every morning, not knowing she was breathing the same harbor air." She lowered Nora's hand gently back to the table. "All right. Go home. Sleep where it's warm. But you'll let Julian drive you, and you'll let him take the address, and tomorrow you'll come to the house, and I will tell you everything, every photograph, every letter, the whole of your father, and I will not, on my honor, on what little honor I have salvaged, let anyone in this family treat you as anything less than what you are. Do you believe me?" "No," Nora said honestly. "But I'd like to." And the old woman nodded, as though that were the most reasonable answer she had ever received, and let her go. Julian walked her out through the kitchen, because Nora would not go through the dining room, and the line cooks fell silent over their pans as the two of them passed. The careful Billionaire and the Waitress, threading single file between the steel tables in the wet heat, and the hiss of the grill, and the smell of garlic and scorched lemon and bleach. At the back door, where the night air came in off the harbor cool and salt and sudden, Nora stopped with her hand on the push bar. "I don't need a ride," she said. "I have my bike." "I know." Julian had his hands in his pockets. In the raw light of the service corridor he looked younger and more tired than he had upstairs, the careful mask set down for a moment by the dish pit and the cold air. "Put the bike in the trunk. Humor me. It's a long ride to Renwick and it's dark, and my grandmother will not sleep tonight if she thinks you're out there alone. And frankly, neither will I, and I've already had a long enough year. A small breath that might, in better times, have wanted to be a laugh. That's not a line. I genuinely have not slept well since the spring." Nora looked at him. "Why do you care?" "You're not even." She stopped, hearing his own word in her mouth. "Blood," he finished it for her without flinching. "No, I'm not. My mother was Vivian's housekeeper for 30 years. Vivian took me in when I was 16 and there was nowhere for me to go, and she paid for my schooling, and she made me into whatever this is, a small motion at his dark suit, the company, the careful stillness. And she has never once, in all of it, called me her grandson. Not because she's cruel, because she's honest, and I'm not blood, and she will not lie even to be kind." He held Nora's gaze. "So when I tell you I watched that woman recognize her own son in your face across a lemon tart tonight, I'm telling you as the one person in that room who knows exactly what it costs her to love someone she didn't expect to. She doesn't do it lightly. She's never once done it lightly. She did it tonight in front of witnesses, against her own lawyers, in the worst possible week for the trust." He took the bicycle from where she'd leaned it by the door and lifted it as if it weighed nothing. "And Bianca knows it. That's the part you need to understand before tomorrow. Bianca and Spencer have spent 20 years as the closest thing Vivian had to heirs. Tonight you walked in with a ring and took that away from them in 4 minutes, and they will not fight you with anything as clean as a fist. I don't want their money, Nora said. I keep saying it. Nobody hears it. I hear it. He pushed the door open with his shoulder and held it for her, and the warm summer dark spilled in, and beyond it the parking lot shone under the harbour lamps. But Nora, wanting nothing, has never once protected anyone from people who want everything. Your mother didn't want their money either. He let that land. It didn't save her from what my grandmother did to her 30 years ago. Don't make the same mistake of thinking your innocence is armor. Let me drive you home. Let me take the address. Let there be one person who knows where you are. She should have said no. Every careful instinct in her, every rule she had written across 26 years of being no one, said no, go alone, tell no one, keep the door shut. But she was so tired, and the night was so large, and somewhere 11 floors up an old woman who had chased her mother out of the world was sitting in a room full of dead candles refusing to be driven home until she knew where her granddaughter slept. You can take the address, Nora said. But I'm riding my bike. I need. Her voice caught, and she hated it, and pushed through. I've had a whole life turned over tonight. I need the one part of it that's still mine. I need to ride home through the warm air like I did yesterday, when I was still no one. Can you understand that? For a long moment Julian Hale looked at her in the harbour light, and something moved behind the careful hazel eyes, something that was not strategy, and not the company, and not the trust. Yes, he said. I can understand that better than you know. He set the bicycle gently back on its wheels and held it steady while she took it. I'll follow at a distance. You won't even see the car. And tomorrow morning a driver will come to the laundromat at 10. And you can throw your swab kit at his head if you like, but you'll come to the house. Because she'll be sitting at the window from dawn. And a woman who waited 22 years should not have to wait through a single extra one. He paused. Will you come? Nora swung her leg over the bicycle. Her ring was back on her finger now. She had slid it home in the kitchen, over the naked stripe of skin, and the small familiar weight of it steadied her more than anything anyone had said all night. She turned it once with her thumb. I'll come, she said. And she pushed off into the warm dark, the salt wind in her face, the city sliding gold and blue around her, the bicycle chain ticking its old familiar song. And she did not see. Because Julian had told the truth and kept the car well back. The second set of headlights that pulled out of the Larkspur's garage a moment after his and turned the other way, toward the bright glass towers downtown, where on the 40th floor of an Ashford building a light was already burning in a lawyer's office, and Bianca Ashford was riding up alone in a mirrored elevator with her severe dark head bowed over her phone, typing a message to a number she had not used in years, that read only. Found something. The bell girl. Pull everything on the mother, Catherine. Waitress, accident overseas, 04. And find out what really happened on that coast road. If there's a crack in her story, I want it before the lab does. The elevator climbed. The message sent, and 11 stops away, above a warm laundromat, a young woman who thought the worst of the night was behind her, turned her key in a knocking radiator's door, and did not yet know that someone with a great deal of money had just gone looking for the one thing her mother had taken to the bottom of a rainy sea. Morning came up over Renwick Street the way it always did in July, early and gold, the laundromat already breathing its warm soap smell up through the floorboards before Nora had her eyes open. She lay on the narrow bed and listened to the radiator knock its 3 patient knocks, and for the length of one breath she let herself believe she had dreamed the whole evening. The terrace. The pearls. The old woman's hands on her face. Then she turned her head and saw the sapphire on her finger catching the window light, and the dream stood up and put on its shoes. She made coffee in the chipped pot. She drank it standing at the sill, watching the street vendors crank their awnings against the heat to come. And she turned the ring with her thumb and tried to decide whether a person was allowed to simply not show up to the day her whole life turned over. At 10 o'clock, A car the color of wet slate stopped at the curb below, and a driver in a grey summer suit stepped out and looked up at her window as though he already knew which one was hers. "He's been there since 9:40, said her downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Okafor, leaning out over the laundromat's open door, with a basket on her hip and curiosity all over her face. "Sent the boy up twice to ask if you wanted water." "Nora." "Baby, who did you marry in your sleep?" "Nobody," Nora said. "It's complicated. It's a town car. Nothing complicated ever came in a town car." Mrs. Okafor squinted. "You eat first. Whatever it is, you face it fed." "Come down. I've got plantain." So Nora ate standing in the doorway of a laundromat in the rising heat, plantain warm and sweet on her tongue, the dryers thrumming under her bare feet, and it was, she thought, exactly the right last meal of her old life, borrowed, generous, smelling of other people's clean clothes. Then she put on her better dress, the blue one, and slid the ring home, and went down to the slate-grey car. The Ashford house was not in the city at all. The car carried her north along the coast road for 40 minutes, the harbour opening silver and enormous on the right, sailboats leaning into the summer wind, and Nora pressed her palm flat to the cool glass and watched a world she had only ever cleaned the edges of go sliding by. Then, high gates, a gravel drive that crunched like cereal, and a house the colour of weathered bone with too many windows to count. Vivian was at one of them. Nora saw her before the car had stopped, a small grey figure standing at a tall ground-floor window, with both hands pressed to the glass, the way a child stands at an aquarium. By the time Nora's shoes touched the gravel, the front door was open, and the old woman was coming down the steps faster than was wise, one hand on the rail, and Julian a step behind her with his arms half raised to catch her, if the morning proved too much. "You came," Vivian said. She stopped on the bottom steps so their eyes were level and simply looked, drinking Nora in, the dry roses smell of her reaching out into the warm air. "I told myself I would not stand at that window. I have been standing at it since 6. A breath that shook. Come in, please, out of the sun. You'll burn. You've got your mother's skin." And there it was again. That lurch. Your mother, casual as weather, as though Catherine were a thing they had always shared. Inside, the house was cool and dim and smelled of beeswax and old paper and lilies, fresh ones this time, white, in a bowl on a table that had probably been carved before either of them was born. 40 empty rooms, Julian had said. Nora believed it. Their footsteps echoed. In here, Vivian drew her into a sitting room, where the morning came through gauze curtains in long pale bars, and on the low table, between 2 sofas, sat a flat wooden box, the kind that holds a life. "I had Julian bring these down from the attic at 5 this morning. He thinks I'm mad. He's correct. Sit. Child, sit by me." Nora sat. The old woman opened the box with hands that would not be still, and lifted out the first photograph, and held it not toward Nora, but against her own chest for a moment first, as if introducing 2 strangers gently. "This is Daniel," she said, and turned it. A young man laughed up out of the frame in summer light, not so different from this one. Dark hair, a careless collar, his head thrown back at something off to the side, and his eyes, dark hazel, crinkled almost shut with the force of his own delight. Nora did not know him. She had never seen this face in her life. And yet her chest filled and ached as though a door she hadn't known was in her had swung wide on its hinges. "He's laughing," Nora said. Her voice came out wrong. He was always laughing. Vivian touched the edge of the photograph. It used to embarrass me. Such an undignified amount of joy in a son of mine. "I would tell him, Daniel, a man of your name does not roar at the table," and he would roar louder, just to ruin me. The old woman's mouth trembled into something that was nearly a smile. "You have it. The same. Here, around the eyes. You did it last night, on the terrace, when that woman with the linens made you laugh about the rent. For half a second you were the image of him and I had to hold the table. There were more." Daniel at the harbour with a fish too small to keep. Daniel in a graduation gown, looking trapped. And then one that stopped Nora's breath entirely. Daniel and a young woman on a windy beach, her dark hair whipping across her laughing mouth, her hand flung up to hold it, a small bright ring on the third finger of her left hand. That's... Nora could not say it. Catherine. Vivian's voice had gone to almost nothing. 3 weeks before they left. He took it. He sent it to me in an envelope, with no letter, the cruelest mail I ever received, because he knew I would understand it. He was saying, "Look what you tried to break." Her thumb moved over the woman's blurred, laughing face. She was lovely. I told myself 30 years ago that she was common. I have looked at this photograph 10,000 times since, and what I see now is a girl who loved my son enough to take him with nothing, which is more than I ever did. I loved him enough to keep his money for him. There is a difference, and it has been eating me since the year you were born. Nora looked at her mother's young face. The blue eyes she had been told were her own, the laughing mouth, and something in her that had been clenched tight for 26 years, loosened all at once and frightened her with how much it hurt to loosen. "I don't remember her face," she admitted. "Just warmth, a song, maybe, and her pressing the ring into my hand. I was 4. I've spent my whole life with a ring and no face." She pressed her knuckles to her own mouth, hard, "And now you've given me her face and I don't know what to do with it. I've never had anywhere to keep these things. You'll keep them here." Vivian closed her hand over Nora's wrist, gently this time. No fierceness left, only an old woman holding on. "All of it. As long as you'll let me." A discreet knock at the door broke the spell. A woman in a soft grey cardigan stood there with a small case, apologetic. "Mrs. Ashford, the technician from the laboratory. Whenever the young lady is ready, it's only a cheek swab. It takes a moment." Nora felt the cold, familiar thing slide back into her chest. Almost a relief. "Now's fine," she said, and stood. And the technician was kind and quick about it, the cotton swab strange against the inside of her cheek. And it was done in under a minute, a small wet stick in a tube that would tell these people whether the morning had been real. Then the technician swabbed Vivian too, and the old woman opened her mouth for it with her chin up and her eyes wet and furious, as though daring the science to contradict her. "There," the old woman said when the technician had gone. "Now they have their certainty in a tube, and we can stop pretending it was ever in question. Julian, have someone bring iced tea to the garden. It's too beautiful a day to spend it indoors weeping over a box. I want to show my granddaughter the lemon trees. Daniel planted them. They're 40 years old, and they have never once given a lemon worth eating. And he loved them anyway, the fool. And for 1 hour, in the garden, under a sky scrubbed blue, and a sun that lay warm across the old stone benches, it was almost happiness." Vivian walked her slowly along the row of stubborn lemon trees, leaning on Nora's arm, telling her father to her in pieces. The time he gave his coat to a man at the harbour and came home blue-lipped and unrepentant, the way he sang badly and on purpose, the dog he'd hidden in the boathouse for a month. Julian brought the iced tea himself and stayed at the edge of it, watching, and once Vivian said something tart about Daniel's singing, and Nora laughed for real. And Julian, careful, unlaughing Julian, let out a short, surprised breath through his nose that was very nearly the start of a laugh, and caught himself, and looked almost alarmed at it. "There," said Nora, pointing at him, glad of anything to point at that wasn't grief. "I saw that. Marisol had a bet." "I don't know what you mean," Julian said, and the corner of his mouth betrayed him, and Vivian looked between the two of them with a sudden sharp brightness in her wet eyes that neither of them noticed. It could not last. Of course it could not last. The garden gate clicked, and the warmth went out of the morning as if a cloud had crossed the sun, though the sky stayed clear. Bianca came across the lawn in cream linen and dark glasses, Spencer trailing her with his phone in his hand and his collar damp. She did not hurry. She never hurried. She let them watch her come, and she carried under one arm a slim leather folder, that she set down on the stone table beside the sweating jug of tea with the delicacy of someone laying down a winning card. "What a picture," she said, lowering her glasses to take them in. "The garden tour. Has she shown you the lemon trees yet?" "She always shows people the lemon trees." She smiled at Nora. "Aunt Vivian, I've spent the night doing the thing none of you have the stomach for, which is the actual work of protecting this family. And before you sign your name to anything, before you put this young woman in front of a single lawyer or a single newspaper, I think you should know what I found. All of you should. It won't take long." "Bianca," Julian set down his glass. "Whatever this is, it can wait for the laboratory. It really can't." She opened the folder. "Because the laboratory will tell us about blood. It won't tell us about this." She slid a photocopied page across the stone toward Vivian, old type, an official seal in the corner, a paragraph ringed in ink. "That is a record from the county system, 20 years ago. A child, placed in temporary care, who told her caseworkers, repeatedly, it's all documented, that she was the secret granddaughter of a wealthy family, that her mother had a sapphire ring, that one day rich people would come and prove who she was." Bianca let the silence stretch. The caseworker's note at the bottom reads, "Julian, read it out. You have the lawyer's eyes." The caseworker's note reads, "Child counseled to stop fabricating family of origin. Narrative dismissed as wish fulfillment. Recommend placement with firm boundaries." The garden had gone very still. Somewhere a bee worked the lavender, loud in the quiet. Nora felt the blood leave her face. "That's," she started. "That's you, isn't it, Nora?" Bianca's voice was gentle. That was the horror of it, it was gentle. "You've been telling this exact story since you were 11 years old. The ring. The rich family. The mother named Catherine. You told it so many times that the people paid to care for you wrote it down as a problem to be managed. And then last night, by the purest chance, you carried a dessert to a table with our name on the booking." She closed the folder softly. "I'm not saying you planned it. I'm saying a child who rehearses a story for 15 years will say it very, very convincingly when the night finally comes. Convincingly enough to make a grieving woman weep into her tart." "Stop it," Vivian said. But her voice had thinned, and Nora heard the thread of doubt enter it. Not because the old woman believed Bianca, but because the seed had been planted in the open air where everyone could see it grow. And a seed in the open is its own kind of poison. "I'm not lying." Nora's voice shook, and she could not steady it, and she hated that she could not, because the shaking made her look exactly like the liar Bianca had drawn. "I did tell that story. I told it because it was true. I had a ring, and I had words inside it, and I had no one, and I was 11, and the only proof I had that I belonged to anybody was 6 words and a sapphire. So yes, I told it. I told it to anyone who'd listen. Until they made me stop." She turned to Vivian, and the cold familiar thing in her chest cracked clean down the middle. "They told me to stop telling stories about you. And I did. For 15 years I stopped. And the one time I let your name out of my mouth was last night, because you asked. You pulled it out of me. I didn't bring it to you. You found it on my hand." "I know," Vivian whispered. "Child, I know, do you?" Bianca cut in, and now the gentleness was gone, and the blade was bare. "Because here is the part I came to say. I made some calls last night. About the accident. About that coast road, overseas, in the rain." She watched Nora's face with the focus of a woman watching a lock turn. "And the story your file tells, the story you've told since you were a child, doesn't match the records. Catherine wasn't traveling with Daniel that night. She'd left him 3 months before. There's a separation on file. There's a payment on file. She let it land like a stone into still water. Someone gave Catherine a great deal of money to walk away from this family a second time. And she took it. And she kept the ring as a souvenir. So before you call this girl your granddaughter, Aunt Vivian, You might ask yourself whose child she really is, because the one thing the records are clear about is that by the time of that accident, Catherine had not been with your son for a season. The garden tilted. The bee droned. The iced tea sweated its slow rings onto the stone. That's not true, Nora said, but her voice had no flaw under it now, because how would she know? She had been 4. She had a ring and a warmth and a song. She had built her entire fragile certainty on 6 engraved words, and this woman in cream linen had just suggested that the words were the only true thing, and everything around them was rot. A payment. Vivian's face had gone the grey of the terrace tablecloth again. What payment? From whom? Bianca. I never authorized any payment. After he left, I had men look for them. I never. You didn't. Bianca held her aunt's eyes. That's rather the question, isn't it? You didn't authorize it. So who in this family did? And in the silence that followed, Nora watched something terrible happen on the old woman's face, watched Vivian Ashford turn, slowly, not toward Bianca, not toward Spencer, but toward Julian. And Julian had gone very still. The careful stillness Nora had filed him under on the first night. The stillness, she understood now with a sick lurch, of a man who had just heard something he already knew. Julian, Vivian said, you drafted the trust this week. You've had the old files. All of them. The investigators' reports from 22 years ago, they go through your office. They have always gone through your office. Her voice was barely there. Did you know about a payment? Grandmother. It was the first time Nora had heard him use the word, and it came out raw. Let me explain it properly. Not like this. Not in front of. Did you know? A long, awful pause. The bee lifted off the lavender and was gone. I knew there was a payment in the file, Julian said quietly. I found it 3 days ago, when the restructuring made me pull the old records. A transfer, 22 years old, routed so it couldn't be easily traced, made to a Catherine Bell. He did not look away from his grandmother, though Nora could see what it cost him. I didn't know what it meant. I still don't. I was going to bring it to you when I'd untangled it. And then last night, a waitress set down a lemon tart, and I saw your face. And I made a decision not to put a 22-year-old shadow over the first time you'd smiled since spring. His jaw worked. I was going to tell you. I swear it. I was waiting until it would do less harm. You knew the name. Nora's voice came from somewhere very far off. Last night. In that private room. You asked me my full name like it was the first you'd heard it. Bell, you said. She would have used Bell. And you already had it. You'd had it for 3 days. In a file. With a payment beside it. She stood up from the stone bench and her knees did not feel like hers. You drove me home. You stood in the parking lot and told me not to make the mistake of thinking my innocence was armor. And the whole time you knew my mother's name was already sitting in a folder on your desk next to a number. Nora, you let me think you were the one honest person in that room. The cold thing in her chest had finished its breaking, and what was under it was not warmth, and was not safety. It was the old certainty she had carried up the elevator at 6 o'clock the night before. That you did not get to keep people. That the moment you let a name leave your mouth, it became a thing others could hold over you. I told you where I sleep. I told you about the dryers. I gave you the one true soft thing I had, and you already had a file. It wasn't like that. Julian came toward her, and she stepped back, fast, and her hip found the stone table, and the jug rocked and slopped tea across Bianca's leather folder, and nobody moved to save it. Nora, the file doesn't prove what she's saying it proves. A payment to your mother doesn't mean Catherine left him. It could mean 100 things. It could mean someone in this family tried to buy her off and failed. It could mean anything, Nora said. That's exactly the problem. You all have files and payments and records, and you can make them mean anything you choose. And I have a ring with 6 words in it, and you've just taught me that even the words might be a lie. She turned to Vivian, and the old woman's face was open and stricken and reaching, and Nora made herself not look at it too long, because if she looked too long, she would forgive everyone everything, and she had learned at 11 what that cost. "I'd like to go home now. The car can take me, or I'll walk to the train. I don't care which." "Don't." Vivian rose, swaying, and Julian's hand shot out to steady her, on pure reflex even now. "Please, child, don't do the thing I taught your mother to do 30 years ago. Don't let the cruelty of this family be the last word you hear from it. Stay, we'll find out about the payment together." You'll find out," Nora said. "You have the files. You have the laboratory. You have all the certainty money can buy. You don't need me in the room while you decide whether I'm real." She slid the ring once around her finger with her thumb, the old steadying motion, the only steady thing in any of it. "Test the swab. You know where I sleep." Julian made sure of that. She walked out of the garden across the lawn that Daniel had run on as a boy, past the lemon trees that had never given a decent lemon, and were loved anyway, through the cool lily-smelling house with its 40 empty rooms, and out the front door into the white summer light, and behind her she heard Vivian say Julian's name once, low and broken, and she heard Julian say nothing at all, which was somehow worse. The slate-grey car was waiting. She did not take it. She walked down the gravel drive in her good blue dress, with the harbour flashing silver through the gates ahead, and she made it exactly as far as the bottom of the drive before her legs stopped working, and she sat down hard on the warm stone of the gatepost wall, and pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes, and shook. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a number she didn't know. For one wild instant she thought Julian, and despised herself for the leap of it. But the message was not from Julian. "Nora Bell." It read, "You don't know me, but I knew your mother. Marisol off the Larkspur floor drinks at my harbour, and last night she told me about a waitress with a sapphire ring who'd made Vivian Ashford weep at her own table, and gave me this number when I begged her for it. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to come asking the right questions about that road. Don't trust the Ashfords, any of them, the old woman included. There's a reason that payment was buried. Catherine never took a dime of it. That money was a lie someone wrote into a ledger to make her look bought. The truth is the same reason you grew up with no name. Meet me where it's safe. I'll know if you've told them. A friend of your father's." Nora sat on the warm gatepost in the summer light, with the harbour blazing in front of her, and a ring on her finger that might mean everything or nothing, and read the message 3 times, and felt the ground she had already lost give way one final time beneath her. Because somewhere out there in the bright city was a person who had been waiting 2 decades for her to start asking, and she did not know yet whether they were the first true thing in this whole turned-over night, or the most dangerous lie of all. She read it a 4th time, and then she did the thing that 26 years had trained her never to do. She typed back, "Where?" The reply came so fast he must have been holding the phone in his hand. "South end of the harbour. Past the fuel dock, the boat shed with the blue doors. Crane and Son. Come alone, come by train, leave the rich man's car at the gate. I'll have the kettle on." Then, a moment later, as if he had heard her hesitate through the screen, "Your father gave me his coat once, in the cold, when I had nothing. I've owed that coat for 30 years. Today I pay it back." The coat. The story Vivian had told her in the garden not an hour ago. Daniel handing his coat to a man at the harbour, and coming home blue-lipped and unrepentant. Nora pressed the phone to her chest, and felt her heart go hard and fast against it. Either this stranger had been there, or someone had fed him the very story Vivian had told her in the garden barely an hour before. She could not tell which. She was learning that she could not tell anything anymore. She stood up off the warm stone of the gatepost wall. Down the drive the slate-grey car idled, patient, the driver's silhouette still behind the glass, and she lifted her hand to him and shook her head once, and walked past it, out the gate, into the white blaze of the coast road. The gravel gave way to hot tarmac that breathed shimmer up against her bare shins. A gull went over, complaining. Somewhere behind her, 11 empty windows watched her go, and one of them, she did not let herself check, might have had a small grey figure pressed to the glass. The train south was nearly empty in the noon heat. Nora sat with her forehead against the warm, vibrating window and watched the harbour unspool. The bright sails, the cranes, the long silver reach of water her father had fished in with a rod too short for the job. She turned the ring with her thumb the whole way, around and around, until the worn gold went slick under her finger. He chose true. 6 words she had built a life on. 6 words a woman in cream linen had taught her to doubt in the space of a single sweating jug of iced tea. The boat shed with the blue doors sat at the end of a pier that smelled of tar and diesel and the green rot of low tide. One door stood open on darkness and the sweet sharp bite of varnish. Inside, a wooden hull sat up on blocks like a beached animal, and an old man in a canvas apron looked up from a strip of sandpaper and went very still, exactly the way Vivian had gone still over the ring. "God in heaven," he said softly. "You've got her mouth," and his eyes laughing in the middle of it. He set the sandpaper down with great care, as if it might break. "Sit down, Nora Bell. There's tea. There's a chair that doesn't wobble if you favor the left arm. And there's 20 years of a thing I should have carried to you on my own 2 feet, except I was a coward, and I'm sorry for it." His name was Elias Crane. He poured tea from a kettle scorched black on a single ring burner into 2 mugs that did not match, and his hands shook nearly as much as Vivian's had, the family trembling and this man's trembling, Nora thought, like 2 ends of the same broken thing finally bending toward each other. The shed was hot and close, and the sawdust hung gold in the bars of light from a high cracked window. A radio murmured somewhere, too low for words. "You knew my father," Nora said. "I knew Danny Ashford before he was anything but a boy with too much money and not enough sense, which made him the best of us." Elias lowered himself onto an upturned crate. "We crewed boats together one summer when he was supposed to be learning the family trade and was learning to be useless instead, on purpose, to spite his mother. He gave me his coat off his own back the night the harbour froze and I'd nowhere warm. I never forgot it. When he met your mother, I was the friend he brought her to first, because he knew I wouldn't price her. His jaw worked, and when it all went wrong, I was the one they came to, both of them, in the rain, the last good night before the road." Nora's mug stopped halfway to her mouth. "What went wrong? Everything the old woman told you is true, far as it goes." Elias rubbed his thumb across the rim of his mug. Vivian broke the match. "Cut the money. Danny walked out with the ring and the clothes he stood in. That part's gospel. But here's the part that got buried, girl, and it cost your whole childhood to bury it." He leaned forward into the gold dust. "They never separated. Not for a season, not for a day. That paper Bianca's waving, the separation, the payment to a Catherine Bell, your father's cousin Gerald drew it up. Gerald Ashford. Bianca and Spencer's father. He ran the family's legal and money side for 30 years, before that careful young fellow Julian ever sharpened a pencil there. Gerald. The name meant nothing, and then meant everything. Bianca's father. Aye, and here's his arithmetic, plain as a ledger. Elias counted it off on shaking fingers. Vivian had 1 son. The son had a child coming you. A child of Danny's would stand first in line to everything, ahead of Gerald's too. Gerald could read a will the way other men read weather. So he set about making sure Danny's child would never be found, and if she ever was, would never be believed. The tide sucked at the pilings under the shed. Nora set her mug down before she dropped it. He forged the separation after. Elias went on. Gentler now. After the road. Backdated it. Created a payment on the books to make your mother look like a woman who'd taken money to go away so that if you ever surfaced, holding that ring, telling the truth, you'd be the daughter of a paid-off opportunist. and not the heir to a thing. He paid the investigator Vivian hired, too. Paid him to come back and tell that grieving old woman the child's trail had gone cold. It hadn't. They knew exactly which county you'd gone into. Gerald let you go into the system on purpose and put a wall of his own paper between you and the only grandmother you had. He pressed the heel of his hand to one eye. I knew. I knew the shape of it, and I had no proof a court would touch. And I had 3 children of my own, and a man like Gerald can starve a boatyard with one phone call. So, I kept my head down, and I kept the one thing your mother left me. And I told myself I'd give it to you when you came. I never thought you'd come this late. What did she leave you? Nora whispered. Elias rose, went to a tin cabinet bolted to the wall, and worked a small key off the chain at his belt. From the back of it he drew an oilcloth packet, soft and brown with handling, and he held it a moment against his apron, the way Vivian had held the photograph against her chest, introducing 2 strangers gently, before he laid it in Nora's hands. Her last letter, he said, written the week before the road. She left it with me the night they came to say goodbye, because she was frightened of Gerald, and she said, I've got it by heart. Girl, forgive me. She said, Elias, if anything happens to us, this is for whoever finds my daughter. So they'll know she was never for sale. So they'll know her father chose true. The oilcloth was warm from his body and cool underneath. Nora's fingers would not work the fold at first. When they did, the paper inside was thin and blue and covered edge to edge in a hand she had never seen and knew at once in her bones. Small, fine, the same hand that had pressed 6 words into a band of gold. She read 3 lines, and the shed swam, and she read them again to be sure the heat and the grief had not invented them. My Nora, if you are reading this, you are grown, and I am not there. And there is no fixing the second thing, so let me try to fix the first. We did not leave each other. We left them. Your grandmother is not a wicked woman, only a frightened one who learnt the wrong lesson from her own losses, and I forgave her long ago, on a windy beach with you kicking inside me. The ring is true. Every word in it is true. Do not let anyone with a folder tell you that you were a story someone made up. You were the truest thing we ever did. Catherine. For a long while Nora could not speak. The radio murmured. The tide breathed. The varnish bit the back of her throat, and the sawdust settled gold on the blue paper. And somewhere out on the water, a horn answered a horn answered a horn, and Nora Bell sat in a stranger's boat shed and held the only thing her mother had ever written to her, and understood for the first time in 26 years that she had not been a problem to be managed. She had been chosen, before she was even born, by 2 people who paid for the choosing with everything they had. She forgave her, Nora said at last, wonderingly, on the beach, with me inside her. She forgave the woman who she could not finish. Your mother was better than the lot of them stacked up, Elias said. It's why Gerald feared her. You can't buy a woman who already has everything she wants. He sat back down heavily. Now, the question that matters. What are you going to do with it? Nora looked up. The cold, familiar thing in her chest, the thing that had cracked in the garden and broken on the gatepost, had gone, and what stood in its place was not safety and not fear. It was anger, clean and warm and entirely new. And underneath the anger, terrifying, was the thing the message had warned her against and the letter had ordered her toward. The desire to go back to the house full of lilies and be loved out loud. You said don't trust them, she said. Any of them. The old woman included. But she didn't do this. Gerald did this. Elias held her gaze, and something in his weathered face eased. I sent that warning before I'd looked at your face. I've sat across from Ashford's my whole life and learned to bolt the door against the name. But I'll tell you what I see now. Girl, I see Danny's eyes, and I see a woman who came alone, by train. The way I asked, when she could have come in the slate car with the whole circus. So, he reached out and folded her hands over the letter the way. Nora realized her mother must once have folded her small fingers over the ring. Maybe the lesson your grandmother learned wrong, you can learn right. Go back. Take the letter. Take me. If you'll have me, I'll stand in any room and say what Gerald did. Now there's someone alive worth the cost of saying it to. His mouth bent. I'm not afraid of a phone call anymore. There's not enough left of that man's reach to starve a rowboat. He's been gone 5 years. It's only his paper that's still doing the harm. Nora stood, the letter pressed to her heart with both hands, and looked at the old man who had carried her mother's truth through 20 silent years out of love for a coat. Will you come now? Today? Elias was already untying his apron. Let me find my good shoes. And girl, he paused, the apron half over his head, his voice gone rough. When you walk into that house, you walk in knowing what you are. You're not asking them for a name. You're bringing them one. She called the house from the train. Not the slate car number, Vivian's own, which the old woman had pressed on her in the garden. The private line, child. It rings beside my bed, and no one else's. It rang once. Nora, Vivian's voice came thin and ragged and instantly, unbearably hopeful. You left. I've been. I am too old to say what I've been. Where are you? Are you safe? Julian has been. I need everyone at the house tonight, Nora said, and heard her own voice come out level and certain, a voice she did not recognize as hers. Bianca, Spencer, Julian, you, at 8. I'm bringing someone who knew my mother and my father, and I'm bringing something my mother wrote, and I'm bringing the truth about Bianca's payment and Bianca's separation papers, and I would like to say it once, in one room, so that no one in your family ever gets to make it mean whatever they choose again. A breath. Will you gather them? A silence on the line, and then a sound from the old woman that was half a sob and entirely fiercely glad. I will gather the dead from their beds if you want them, Vivian said. 8 o'clock. The long room. And Nora. The iron came into it. The iron that had run an empire and lost the only thing it wanted. Thank you for not letting us be the last word. Your mother taught you that. And I will spend what's left of me being grateful she did the job I failed at. The long room of the Ashford house faced west, and at 8 o'clock the summer sun lay across its floor in a wide amber sheet, the way it had lain across the white cloths of the larkspur the evening this began. The lilies had been changed again. Someone had lit no lamps, as if the family preferred to do this in the failing gold light, where faces could still be read. Bianca stood by the cold hearth in charcoal silk, arms folded, her dark head a decision. Spencer sat with no glass in his hand for once, his collar buttoned, his red-rimmed eyes flicking to the door. Vivian sat very straight in a high chair, with Julian standing at her shoulder, and Julian, when Nora came in with Elias and the old man's good shoes squeaking on the parquet, looked at her with his whole careful face undone, and started to speak, and stopped himself, and only watched her, because he had learned in one bad morning that he had lost the right to go first. This is Elias Crane, Nora said. He crewed boats with my father. He was the friend Daniel brought my mother to first, because he knew Elias wouldn't price her. She let that land on Bianca like a thrown stone. He's kept something for 20 years that I'd like to read to you. But first I'd like to ask Bianca a question, since she's so fond of folders. She set her mother's blue letter on the long table, in the amber light, where everyone could see the small fine hand. Bianca, who told you about the payment to Catherine Bell? Bianca's chin lifted. It's in the family records. Anyone with access, who told you to look? Nora kept her voice gentle. That was the horror of it. She had learned that trick from Bianca herself. 3 days ago, Julian found a payment when he pulled the old files for the trust. Last night you didn't know about me. By this morning, you had a county placement record from 20 years ago, and a separation agreement, and a story about a coast road, all polished to a shine. That's fast work, even for a woman protecting her family. Almost as if you knew exactly which drawer to open. almost as if it had been waiting in your father's drawer your whole life. The amber light shifted on the floor. Spencer's mouth came open. Bianca did not move, but something behind her eyes did. "My father is gone," Bianca said. "Leave him out of it." "I can't," Nora said. "He's the whole of it." She turned to Elias and nodded once, and the old man stepped forward into the gold light, turning his cap in his shaking hands, and told it, all of it, in the plain, unhurried voice of a man who had rehearsed nothing, because he had lived it. Gerald's arithmetic. The forged separation, backdated, the payment invented to make a faithful woman look bought. The investigator paid to bring a grieving mother the lie that the child's trail had gone cold. The wall of paper built between a 4-year-old and her own grandmother, brick by careful brick, so that 2 children named Bianca and Spencer would stand first in line. When he finished, the room was so quiet Nora could hear the lilies dropping pollen onto the table. "That's the testimony of a boat mechanic," Bianca said, but her voice had lost its lovely cool edge and gone brittle. "Against documents. Against records." "You can't. You're right," Julian said. Every head turned. He had not moved from his grandmother's shoulder, but he had taken something from inside his jacket, a single folded page, and he laid it now beside Catherine's letter on the long table, and his hand, Nora saw, was not entirely steady either. "His word against the documents proves nothing," Julian said, looking only at Nora. "So 3 days ago, when I found the payment, I did the thing I was trained to do by the man who built that drawer. I traced it. Properly, the transfer to Catherine Bell never reached Catherine Bell. There's no account, no signature, no deposit on the other side. It's a ghost entry. A number written into a ledger to be found later, by someone like Bianca, on a night like last night." He breathed. "The separation agreement is signed in your mother's name, Nora." I pulled 3 genuine examples of her hand from Daniel's old letters to compare. It isn't her signature. It isn't close. It's Gerald's clerk's, the same loop on the capital C that signs 4 other forged instruments in that same file. I have a forensic document examiner who'll swear to it in any room you put her in." His jaw tightened. "I found all of this 3 days ago. And I made the worst decision of a careful life. I decided to protect my grandmother from a 22-year-old shadow instead of telling her the truth. And then I let you walk out of that garden this morning, believing I'd kept it from you to use against you. I hadn't. I was keeping it to clear you. And I was too slow and too proud and too frightened of doing it badly to do it in time. That's not an excuse. It's just what's true." Nora's throat had closed. She made herself not look at him too long, because if she looked too long she would forgive him before the room was finished, and the room was not finished. "There's one more thing," Julian said quietly, "and it's the part that costs me, so I'd rather say it standing up." He turned, finally, to Bianca and Spencer. "Everything I am, you 2 gave me by accident. Your father took me in as a charity, made me his clerk, taught me the family's law because he wanted a loyal hand that owed him. My whole career sits on the foundation Gerald poured. If I put his forgery in front of a court, I don't just clear Catherine. I unmake the man who made me. I put a stain on the name that signs my paychecks and a question mark over every instrument I drafted under him for 12 years. He looked back at Nora, and the careful stillness was gone, burned all the way through. I'm going to do it anyway. Tomorrow morning, with or without anyone in this room behind me. Because I spent 12 years being grateful to a family for taking me in, and it turns out they were also the family that threw a 4-year-old away. I can't be grateful to both. So I choose the 4-year-old. A breath. I should have chosen her last night, in the parking lot, when she told me about the dryers. I'm sorry I made her think the only honest man in the room had a file on her. I'd give a great deal to take that back. It was Vivian who broke. Not loudly. The old woman had sat through all of it with her chin up and her hands folded in the discipline of 70 years, And now she reached out one trembling hand and drew Catherine's blue letter toward her across the table, and read it where it lay, her lips moving, and when she came to the line about the windy beach, she made the small broken sound from the terrace, the one Nora would hear for the rest of her life. She forgave me, Vivian whispered. On a beach, with the child inside her. She pressed her knuckles to her mouth. I sent men to find my son so I could be forgiven, and they brought me back a lie that let me stop trying. And all the while the forgiveness was sitting in a boat shed, waiting for me to be brave enough to deserve it. She lowered her hand. When she lifted her face, it was wet and furious and absolutely certain. The empire and the iron and the loss all burning in it at once. Bianca, Spencer, look at me. They looked. Your father did a thing I will not name kindly. Because, as I said last night, it does not deserve to be told kindly, Vivian said. And you have spent one day, one single day, defending his paper instead of asking whether a girl who sleeps above a laundromat might be your own blood. I am not going to ask which of you knew. I can see the answer well enough in one of your faces. Her pale eyes moved to Bianca and held. I built this family. I get to say what it is. And I am telling you that as of tomorrow morning, the trust will be restructured a final time. In daylight, in front of lawyers who are not Julian, and Daniel's daughter will take the place that was always hers. And the rest of you will receive exactly what a frightened old woman thinks is fair, which is a great deal more than you have earned today, and a great deal less than you imagined this morning. She folded her hands again. You may fight it. You have the means. But you will be fighting a forensic examiner, a boat mechanic, a letter in your cousin's own hand, and me. And I have wanted to lose a fight on the right side for 22 years, and I will enjoy it enormously. Spencer made a small sound and put his face in his hands. But Bianca stood very still by the cold hearth, and Nora watched her. Because Nora had learned in one day to watch this woman, and saw the thing happen that she had not expected. Bianca crossed to the table. She did not look at Vivian or at Julian. She picked up the blue letter and read it, the whole of it, slowly, in the last of the amber light, and when she set it down, her severe, lovely face had come apart at one small seam, just the corner of her mouth, just the wet at the rim of one eye that she did not let fall. I knew there was paper that protected us, Bianca said, very low, to no one. I never asked what it was protecting us from. That was the trick of it. He made it so we'd never have to ask. She drew a breath that shook. I came here today to win. I'm rather good at winning. It's the only thing he ever praised. She looked up, and for 1/2 second the cool was gone, and there was only a woman of 40 who had just learned her whole inheritance was a wall built across a child. He pulled it out of the air this morning, she said, almost to herself. Money makes everyone see faces in the clouds. I said that to you. About your grandmother. Her jaw moved. It was my father seeing the cloud. Not her. She picked up her own leather folder from where it still sat, tea-stained from the garden, and she did not open it, and she did not slide it across the table like a winning card. She held it a moment, and then she set it down, gently, in front of Nora, like a thing surrendered. Burn that, she said. It's the only copy of the placement record I pulled. I won't be needing it. And she walked out of the long room without her glasses and without her brother, and the squeak of the front door closing was the only thing she said in apology. But it was, Nora thought, more than she had expected, and exactly as much as a woman like that could carry to the door at once. The slate light was going blue by the time the room emptied. Spencer left murmuring something nobody answered. Elias was taken to the kitchen by the woman in the grey cardigan, and the promise of supper, his good shoes squeaking, his 20-year burden finally set down, and the woman from the laboratory came at the very end of it, apologetic again, with a phone in her hand, and a result that no longer needed to prove anything, and read it out into the blue dusk anyway, because some things have to be nailed to the door where no one can pry them loose, that the relationship was confirmed, that Nora Bell was the daughter of Daniel Ashford's line, that the science and the ring and the boat mechanic and the dead woman's forgiving letter all said the same thing at last in the same breath. Vivian closed her eyes when she heard it. "I knew it over the lemon tart," she said. "But thank you for the certainty. Now no one can take it from her." She reached for Nora's hand, and Nora gave it, and the old woman turned it over and looked at the ring, and at the naked stripe of skin no longer naked beneath it, and pressed her papery lips to the worn gold once, and let go. "Go and talk to him," she said, not opening her eyes. "He's been standing at that window for an hour pretending to watch the harbor. He learned that from me. We're a family of people who stand at windows instead of saying the thing. Break the habit, child. Start tonight." Julian was on the terrace off the long room, where the lemon trees in their pots stood black against a harbor going from gold to violet, and the warm night air came off the water smelling of salt and the green of the leaves, and, faintly, of the dry roses powder that followed Vivian everywhere through the house. He did not turn when Nora came out. She stood beside him at the rail, close enough to smell cedar and clean linen under the heat, and for a while neither of them said the thing, and the harbor lights came on one by one below them, exactly the way they had the first night, 11 floors up. "You chose the 4-year-old, Nora said finally. "I'd choose her again." Julian's hands were flat on the warm stone of the rail. "I'd have liked to choose her sooner." In the parking lot. "I stood there telling you that wanting nothing wouldn't protect you, and I had the proof in my own office that you'd been thrown away to protect somebody's arithmetic. And I said nothing, because I was so busy being careful with my grandmother's heart that I was careless with yours." A muscle moved in his cheek. "I've been careful my whole life. It's the only currency I had in this house. Be useful, be steady, never need anything out loud, and they'll let you stay." I was 16, and it kept me fed. And it nearly cost me the one person who ever walked into this family and made me forget to watch the floor. Nora turned the ring once with her thumb. "I gave you the dryers," she said. "I'd never given anyone the dryers." "I know." He looked at her then, and there was nothing careful left in it. "I haven't been able to think about anything else. The warmest place you'd ever lived was warm by accident, from other people's washing. 11 stops from a house with 40 empty rooms. I keep wanting to fill the rooms. I keep wanting to make the warmth not an accident anymore." He stopped and breathed, and his hand moved on the stone and did not quite reach hers. "That's the closest I know how to come to saying it. I've never had practice. They were a family of people who stood at windows." Nora looked at his hand on the warm stone, an inch from her own. The old rule rose in her. "Tell no one. Keep the door shut. You do not get to keep people." And she heard. Under it, in a small fine hand she had finally been allowed to read, her mother's voice. "You were the truest thing we ever did. Do not let anyone with a folder tell you that you were a story someone made up. You laughed through your nose in the garden," Nora said, "at your grandmother's joke about the singing. You looked alarmed." The corner of Julian's mouth moved, helplessly. "Marisol had a bet," he said. "Marisol had a bet," Nora agreed, and that was the thing that did it, not a declaration, not a folder, just a bet a tired woman had made over the soup about whether a careful man could be made to laugh, and Nora put her hand over his on the warm stone, and felt his turn under hers, and hold on the way Vivian's had held on, the grip of someone who had been keeping a door shut for years, and had just felt it blow open. They did not say the word. The subtext was the whole of it, but the harbor lights doubled in the dark water below, and the lemon trees breathed their green into the salt night, and somewhere behind them in the long room, an old woman, who had once chased a waitress out of the world, stood at her own window, watching her granddaughter choose to keep someone, and did not interrupt, and let the habit break. The summer turned, the way summers do, slow and gold, and then, all at once. Nora did not move into the house with the 40 rooms, not at first, not the way Julian's filling up heart had imagined. She kept the studio above the laundromat through the end of the season, because, as she told Vivian, A person should get to leave the warmest place she ever lived on her own 2 feet and not be carried out of it like a parcel. But she came north along the coast road most evenings, and the slate-grey car learned the way to Renwick Street so well the driver started bringing Mrs. Okafor's plantain up to the house, where Vivian declared it the finest thing to enter her kitchen in 40 years, and tried, unsuccessfully, to hire Mrs. Okafor on the spot. Elias Crane finished the wooden hull in his shed with the blue doors, and the Ashford family, quietly, with no folder and no winning card, saw to it that Crane and Son would never again be one phone call from going under. He came to Sunday lunches and told Nora her father to her in pieces until the pieces became a whole man she could almost hear roaring at the table. Bianca did not come to the lunches, but a letter arrived in the autumn in a severe and lovely hand with a single loop on the capital C that was nothing at all like the forged one, and it said only that she had read her father's instruments at last, all of them, and was setting right what she could of the ones she could reach, and that she did not expect to be answered, and was not writing to be. Nora answered it anyway. It seemed the kind of thing her mother would have done, on a windy beach, with forgiveness she could not afford. And in the spring, the first spring, the one after the long melt that no one in that careful house had laughed through, the oldest of the lemon trees on the terrace, the one Daniel had planted 40 years before, and loved although it had never once given a lemon worth eating, put out a single hard green fruit, no bigger than a thumb. Vivian found it. She came in from the terrace, holding it cupped in both papery hands, as if it were made of breath, the dry roses smell of her arriving before she did, her pale eyes streaming in the way they no longer fought, and she set it on the long table in the morning light between a bowl of white lilies and a small framed photograph of a laughing dark-haired man. 40 years, she said, and the fool tree waited until there was someone in the house worth giving a lemon to. She looked at Nora, and at Julian beside her with his hand easy now at the small of Nora's back, no longer a question. It'll be sour. It's always going to be sour. It's that kind of tree. Daniel never could grow anything but joy and bad fruit. Her voice cracked, and she let it. Cut it in 3. I want us all to taste the sour thing my son loved for no good reason. It seems exactly the sort of stupid, hopeful. She pressed her knuckles to her mouth, and lowered them, and finished it. The sort of stupid, hopeful thing this family is going to do from now on. They cut it in 3. It was every bit as sour as promised, and Julian, who had not laughed through the spring melt the year before, put his head back and roared at the bitterness of it exactly the way the man in the photograph was roaring. And Vivian caught the table with one hand and laughed and wept at once, and Nora stood between them with her mother's ring on her finger and her mother's words warm against her skin, and turned the worn gold once with her thumb, not against the long night any more, but only because it was hers, and she was no one's secret, and the warmth in this house, at last, was not an accident. The ring had caught the light first, on a summer terrace 11 floors above the harbour, on the 3rd finger of a waitress nobody had thought to look at twice. It caught the light now in a kitchen full of sour lemon and white lilies, and a billionaire grandmother weeping with joy instead of grief, and this time, when the old woman opened both her arms, the young woman walked into them and stayed. And neither of them was a stranger, and neither of them would ever again be no one. If this story warmed your heart, stay with us at the table a little longer. Subscribe to Billionaire Tableside Stories, and let us know in the comments when the truth finally came home. Did you weep with Vivian, or cheer for Nora? Like this story, share it with someone who believes love and dignity matter more than money. And we will see you at the next table, where another quiet life is about to be turned over like a stone, and another heart is about to find its way home.